this video, I'm philosophizing on aesthetic absorption as it pertains to the overarching subcomponent personality characteristics, sensitivity to newness and or devotedness and or aspiration, each meaningful to engage more focused, deliberate, engaging within certain aesthetic experiences, more concerned with certain personal goals and or self-tasks that one engages certain intrinsic processes and or intrinsic properties meaningful to elaborate and or engage more positive meaning and affect, elaborating more meaningfulness processes within the aesthetic absorption. Sensitivity to newness, the opposite polarity being concreteness, most associated with the disinterest and or dissatisfaction with novelty compared to sensitivity to newness, that is most related to engaging, in many cases, repeated aesthetic experiences, exploring novelty within those repeated experiential encounters. Be it one is reading the same book and or may repeat reading a book that one enjoys, is more likely to take note of and or perceive various component parts and or processes one may have not perceived existing prior, that tends to engage more meaningful perspective taking skills and or elaborate one's creative thinking domain specific to the novelty that one is perceiving in terms of the new and or original and or distinct component parts and or processes that are meaningful to engage more positive meaning and affect with repeated volitions and or conducts is more likely to ultimately cultivate more positive meaningful emotion and or healthy psychological functioning that is meaningful to satisfy certain essential and or necessitated underlying psychological needs, most related to individual autonomy and or competence and or meaning in life and or uniqueness, and in some cases with individuals whom are higher in intellect, knowledge, that builds certain more meaningful pathways within the brain, connecting the limbic areas of the brain, the cingulate cortex that is most associated with certain semi-autobiographical information processes, associated with more the deliberations in terms of self-conflicted information that's connecting meaningful emotions to one's executive functioning, engaging certain self-preferential evaluations of risk and or benefit that are future-oriented in terms of those repeated experiential encounters, that's ultimately releasing and or synthesizing and or engaging the reuptake of acetylcholine that's sensitive to distinct and or new and or original experiences in terms of processing what is meaningful to engaging more meaningful learning experiences, and also identifying and recognizing what's new within the experience, the novelty within one's meaningful learning. Compared to devotedness, that's most related to the sacred feelings one experiences, not to be conflated with spirituality. This is most related to aesthetic appreciations that sustain more meaningfulness processes in terms of often unusual and or unique self-preferences that are original to the self that others may not engage. For example, an individual who decides for a month or two to explore picking dandelions, collecting dandelions, and then from those dandelions thinking each day, I'm going to conduct some distinct activity with these dandelions, from creating aromatic boiling of the dandelion with different approaches to experimenting with aromatic dandelion boiling, including a vaporizer and or putting the dandelions in a kettle and or may have a bubble bath with the dandelions, not so much for the aroma, yet to think more about what it would be like to be in the kettle as one was boiling the dandelions, exploring more distinct, creative, more personal connections with the dandelions that is more meaningful and or sacred to the self. Had one disrupted these more sacred values, an individual is more likely to become more upset and or experience more negative, meaningful emotions, and in some cases feel violated in terms of their unique morality and or ethics. Meaning that devotedness is more related to this personal desire to engage what an individual deems to be valuable to them. The opposite polarity being repulsiveness. Individuals who would find this repugnant and or to truly deprive one of a meaningful experience. Not to mean that individuals who are higher in repulsiveness are sensitive to meaning in life. It's quite the opposite. Individuals who are higher in repulsiveness are more likely to perceive meaninglessness and whom are more likely to engage in what is expected and or more normalcy, whom perceive no meaning in the unusual and or the sacred, unique, moral and or ethical choices another conducts that is unique to their morality. Not necessarily ethics, yet their morality, that they perceive to be aesthetically beautiful and or elegant in terms of cultivating more meaningful living for them uniquely, to the exclusion of others. Compared to aspiration, most associated to connecting one's subjectivity to certain more meaningful, competent building life goals and or personal life pursuits that are meaningful to cultivate competencies within one's being, engaging more intrinsic motivations that are most likely to satisfy the certain essential and or necessitated underlying psychological needs for meaning in life and or individual autonomy and or competence and or uniqueness, and in some cases in individuals again whom are higher in intellect, knowledge. Not always knowledge for individuals who are lower in intellect, and there's also more mixed reliability in terms of individual autonomy and or meaning in life, as intellect tends to be most meaningful to, ironically, living a more meaningful life and also perceiving meaning in life, including being able to recognize one's more personal values and or meaningful contributions within more calibrated self-knowledge and or self-awareness that is more meaningful to satisfy with clearer bounds the individual autonomy one maintains and experiences. Individuals whom are lower in intellect may lack the vocabulary to be able to engage the meaningful utterances of thought that help them to recognize what cultivates a healthy psychological functioning sense of individual autonomy, and which ultimately helps one to, within the self, intrinsically create meaning that's unique to the self. Individuals who are lower in intellect often rely more on a universal meaning that is truly meaningless and more harmful to the self, that's counterproductive compared to self-created meaning from within one's aspirations, that is more likely to engage feelings of ambition and or intrinsically motivate one to succeed and engage more difficulties in one's existentia. The opposite polarity of aspiration is most related to more counterproductive motivations that deprive the self of certain feely-wheelies that are needed to sustain more difficult life pursuits in terms of more pointlessness to one's existentia, needing an individual to engage more meaningful, current to future oriented endeavors with the appropriate aspiration to be able to accomplish one's more difficult life goals. Most likely to engage certain aesthetic absorption. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Keep on this episode.